Hello, everyone. Hello, we're live on LinkedIn. It's great to see everyone. Always wonderful to have these LinkedIn live sessions, and we're really excited to go over our Skift Research 2024 Outlook. If you don't know me, my name is Seth Borko. I am the head of our research department, and I'm joined by two of our excellent analysts, Pranavi and Sanya. And together, we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes or so going over our outlook, and then after that we're going to have some time to take questions for Q&A. So please stick around, please be engaged, type in the chat where we're looking at your questions. You can let us know where you're from. I'm here in cold January New York, but really excited to be here with you all today. So what are we going to talk about today? We have three things we want to talk about from our outlook. Now, our full outlook is available to purchase and read online. You get a 25% off discount code for using code LIVE, as in LinkedIn Live. And it's got several different sections covering many different sectors of the travel industry. Today, what we're going to cover, I'm going to give a broad overview of our outlook. I'm going to have Sanya talk to us about the outlook for tourism and travel and destinations and international travel. And I'm going to have Pranavi touch on some core topics for hotels or anyone who sells hotels and hospitality. And then we'll take questions on broader sections. All right. So look, without any further ado, let's jump into it. And I want to talk to you a little bit about our travel 2024 outlook for travel, according to Skift and Skift Research. Now, I think that we have three core themes that we really want you to keep in mind for the year ahead. So the first is that travel demand is going to normalize. I kind of joke that during the pandemic, we always talk about, the new normal. Well, now we're just back to plain old normal. And we're hopeful that we're going to enter in a Goldilocks period, right? We had 2019 and 2020 in particular, right? COVID, way too cold. And then we had 2022, even 2023, to an extent, too hot. And we're hopeful that this year will be just right. And that is our house view. You should not expect 20, 30, 40, 50% year-on-year growth for the broad travel industry. That's not a bad thing. In fact, that's a very, very healthy thing. We think that sectors and regions are going to continue to decouple, and we're going to talk a little bit more about why that is, because some regions and some sectors are recovering and growing unevenly. And we think, in general, economic and consumer trends remain very supportive of the travel industry and our businesses going into 2024. So here's that first slide about that new normal giving way to plain old normal. I think this is a really core thing to understand about the industry. This is taken from data from our Skift Travel 200, so looking at large public companies, and you can see that massive collapse in the pandemic in 2020 and into 2021. Then we get hyper growth. And this is the rebound and the recovery. I mean, you can see we almost hit 100% year-on-year growth, and this is year-on-year growth. And then even as recently as just a couple quarters ago, we were seeing 20, 30% year-on-year growth. That's not going to continue. We're going to move towards a more normal pace of, mid to high single-digit, low double-digit growth for the travel industry. And again, I just want to emphasize that's not just okay, it's a good thing. If we continue to grow at 20%, I mean, it would be wonderful, but I think it would be a sign that something was still wrong in the market. We want to be getting back to normal. Travel is an industry that can grow faster than GDP in the long run. We want to get back to that GDP plus growth rate, and that's where we see our industry going. Now, here's where we're going to talk a little about sectors. And these are our revenue growth estimates for these broad travel subsectors. And this is sort of where my theme about decoupling comes in. And you can see it's a bit of a role reversal. We think airlines will actually be one of the fastest growing sectors this year. That was not the case in prior years. And short-term rentals, a little bit more towards the bottom. And again, that's not a knock on short-term rentals. It's just that they recovered the fastest and they actually have grown the most out of almost any travel sector, whereas airlines have really not fully recovered. Now, if you're in the United States, you might think that's a little bit of a strange statement. They're definitely back in the United States, but certainly not globally are airlines fully recovered. And then we've got a spectrum of growth, again, running from those high single digits to low double digits throughout these different sectors. Let's talk about the economic outlook. Let's talk a little bit about the economic picture. This is US data, but I think it kind of applies for a lot of the world, although it's a little bit different. The vibes are off, as the kids would say. As the Gen Zs, we're doing a lot of Gen Z market research, and they love to talk about vibes, good vibes, bad vibes. What this chart is showing us is consumer sentiment, how Americans feel about the state of the economy, the state of the country, the state of things in general. Consumer sentiment is negative, and a lot of people attribute that to the economic picture. You hear a lot about layoffs, you hear a lot about issues, it's going to be an election year. But if you actually look at the economic data, what we find is the economic data is actually quite strong. Inflation, especially in the US, is moderating and coming back to very healthy levels. Unemployment, despite all these tech layoff headlines, unemployment is low and job growth actually continues in the United States. And what this chart does is it looks at historical unemployment and inflation and correlates it with historical consumer sentiment. And it says, based on the current economic environment, where should consumer sentiment be in light blue? And consumer sentiment should be based on the economic conditions, next to nearly 100. Instead, it's actually in the 60s or 70s. And so what we think has happened is that people tell us in surveys that they feel bad, but the actual hard economic data suggests that there's actually quite a lot of strength in the economy, and that when push comes to shove, people will vote with their wallets more than with vibes. And so rather than worry about a vibe session, I think what some of our data and our surveys suggest is that people are eager to travel. In fact, again, this is survey data that we conducted in our travel tracker. Americans' intent to increase their spending on travel is at the highest rate it's been since the summer of 2021. And so the economic data is actually quite supportive, and people tell us they intend to spend. Again, this is more survey. This is a millennial and Gen Z survey asking, so for the young generations, this is global though. This includes the United Kingdom and Germany, so it includes a broad swath of Europe as well. Where do young people, and millennials aren't even that young anymore, but where do younger generations intend to kind of increase their spending over the next 12 months? Take a look at that. It's dining out, it's arts and culture, it's travel and vacation. So it's very much experiences and very much leisure and discretionary spend. And so we think that the economic support is there, that travel is a priority, and that we're not sort of dissuaded by some of these scary headlines or bad media reporting, or consumers just feeling a general sense of malaise. We think that when we actually look at the spending data, when we look at the economic data, when we look at travel and specifically, we continue to see strong demand for travel in 2024. And that leads us to our forecast. This is our forecast for international cross-border trips. You can see that 2024 is basically, this is not domestic travel, international only, but 2024 is basically the year that we think we're finally fully getting back to normal. And Sonya's going to talk about why that is, with growth into 2025 and 2026. And a final point, although we are absolutely moving out of the revenge travel era, there is still catch-up potential for the travel industry. So these are those same estimates for international cross-border travel. And you can see we're getting back to 2019, we're getting back to growth. But if you actually look at the trend line of what we were on track to do before the pandemic and how that lined up with the global economy, we still remain below the pre-pandemic trend line for international travel, and we think will remain so. About 120 million international trips below potential, even as we fully recover back to 2019 levels. And so there's still a little bit of pent-up demand. There's still growth. We're definitely normalizing, coming back to a more regular pace. We're seeing a bit of decoupling with some regions and some sectors growing faster than others. There's certainly some negative headlines and like I said, vibes out there, but the core data, and when people tell us and when they vote with their feet, is that the economy is doing well. They want to travel. Travel's a priority. It's a generational shift, and we think we're still below potential. So we're still optimistic that we're going to go from too cold to too hot to just right in 2024. And our base case is that we're optimistic about growth in the travel industry in 2024. So that's my little intro with the overview. What I'm going to do is turn it over to my colleague, Sonia, and she's going to talk a little bit more about specific country and sector-specific performance. So I'll turn over to you, Sonia.
Thank you, Seth. Hello, everyone. Today, we're taking a closer look at global travel performance and all the regions that are fueling its growth. Our Outlook 2024 report does dive into travel performance across all regions, so do take a look. But for today, I will be highlighting some interesting stories coming out of the Outlook that will shape travel in 2024. So, the first one, 2023, was the year of recovery. Now, 2024, we think, will be the year when we move beyond recovery to see actual growth in the travel industry. Second, Asia will be the new Europe, meaning Asia will drive growth in 2024. The third one will be a little discussion about mass tourism events. So, next slide, please. So, let's talk about the first story. This is a chart from the Skift Travel Health Index, which is our tool that monitors data across 22 different countries and benchmarks it to 2019 levels. Now, we've been doing this since 2020, so we can see just how far travel has come. From the lows of April 2020, when travel was at like 20% of 2019 levels, fast forward 3 years, April 2023, we surpassed the global travel average, surpassed 2019 levels. And this trend continued through the year until we closed at 102 in December 2023. But this was the year, the line is pretty close to 2019 levels, which is why we're calling it a year 2023, a year of recovery. And 2024 is when we will start seeing growth over the new set benchmark, which is 2023. Let's zoom into the regions on the next slide. So here's dividing the index into the different regions, and we see growth across the board. Latin America leads the index, and we can clearly see that Latin America has consistently surpassed 2019 levels for a while now. We also see that all the other regions have made recovery, but 2024 will be the year when we will start seeing actual growth. Um, Moving to our next story, which is Asia as the new Europe. Now, Seth talked about a little bit about the decoupling, and we see this interesting trend where we see this regional swap, and we expect Asia to be the center of growth in 2024. This chart is a projection for the top 200 companies growth travel revenue forecast for divided by regions, and we see some shifting dynamics here where companies in Europe, which is a most popular tourist hotspot, is expected to grow by 5%. And then you look at Asia Pacific, and we see a boom of growth of 20%, which is expected. Now, our outlook also sort of lines up with this forecast. So, moving on to the next slide, we go back to the Travel Health Index, where if you look at the black line, which is Europe's Travel Health Index, you see that Europe has recovered, but growth has been sluggish. Now, there are multiple reasons tying it to the economy, geopolitics. But when you look at Asia Pacific, it was lagging for the performance was lagging for the longest time. But come early 2023, we see such rapid growth in the region. Let's find out why. China. China really was the missing part of this puzzle. While we did see travel boom in markets like India, we had only the region, Asia Pacific, had reached only about 72% of recovery to 2019 levels by the end of 2022. But the moment China reopened, we saw this rapid growth, which not just pushed Asia Pacific's travel average up, but even boosted the global travel average, and we surpassed 2019 levels in April 2023. The next slide gives our forecast for Asia Pacific. And of course, like we've established, China is the most significant contributor to Asia Pacific. So, as China's outbound travel returns, Asia Pacific's international travel volumes will come back as well. Europe, on the other hand, we see more modest growth levels. And it's pretty evident when you look at these numbers, because if you just compare the 2023 number to Asia Pacific, it's twice the size. Now, Europe is the largest region with international travel volumes. So it would be hard to see double digit growth levels in this region. So, wrapping all of this up, what Asia Pacific's growth has largely been driven by the strong domestic demand as well as the growth in India. For Europe, Europe had its revenge travel moment. Also, the recovery has been driven by intra European travel as well as inbound American travel, courtesy the favorable exchange rates. But now it's Asia's time for revenge travel demand. Of course, Asian countries were one of the last to reopen borders for travel, which is why a lot of companies like Hopper and Kayak are seeing Asian countries becoming international tourism hotspots in 2024. Now, you put that together with easing visa policies and better airline seat capacity. We feel that Asia has so much more room to achieve recovery and then further growth. Europe, on the other hand, we feel will normalize, stabilize. Of course, there will be growth, but more stable growth, because, of course, like I mentioned, its revenge travel time is over, but there are also some issues relating to the economy, geopolitical instability, extreme weather conditions, which is why we anticipate Asia Pacific to be the center of growth in 2024. Moving to our next highlight, uh, the next slide. Impact of mass tourism events. Now, the next slide. So, here coming back to the Travel Health Index, it's so interesting to see. We've seen that Latin America has been leading the index, the regional index, but you see that slight bump in November 2023, and that was when Latin America achieved the highest ever regional index recorded of 115, and it was all due to the demand surge from Taylor Swift's Eras tour. And moving to the next slide, India hosted the Cricket World Cup 2023 across multiple cities, and this drove strong hotel demand, which is why hotels across all the cities were able to grow rates at more than 200% year on year, which was so great. And this has followed through in 2024 as well, when Paris has geared up to host the Summer Olympics in July and August. And we're already seeing that hotel rates are up 24%. Large scale events like Taylor Swift's Eras tour, Beyonce's Renaissance World Tour have made headlines, and they have largely driven, largely boosted travel performance. And this ties us back to when Seth was talking about people's preference for experiences. It ties back to that, because people are not just, when they travel, they're looking for experiences, and it's not just on their own, but they also want to be a part of a larger community, interact with people. um, so wrapping up, 2024, those are the three main stories that I wanted to highlight, that 2024 will be the year of travel growth, spearheaded by the growth in Asia, and then mass tourism events, which reflect the shift in the post-pandemic shift in consumer preference and for experiences. And we'll be seeing more of that in 2024. Now, the Outlook 2024 shares forecasts for all the other regions, so please do take a look. And that was a broader perspective on the regions. And Pranavi will now dive a little more into what's happening with sectors and talking about hotels.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Sonia. So I'm going to spend the next few minutes talking about a particularly interesting topic, not just for hotels, but for anyone who sells hotel rooms. So it might be hotel owners, hotel franchises, as well as the OTAs. And this is on the topic of whether hotel pricing strength that was really seen through the pandemic, whether that strength can continue into 2024. And just to highlight that we did publish a full report on this topic for free on the Skift website. So yeah, do check that out as well on Skift Research. So yeah, so on this chart on the left, I think will be of no surprise to anyone who has tried to book a hotel room in the last 4 years. You know, hotel rooms have become more expensive on a nominal level, and we can see that hotel prices were very quick to recover from the kind of bottoming out in March 2020, and they did rise materially above 2019 levels as of today. But we can see on the chart on the right, in the last kind of year and a half or so, pricing growth has slowed, and today it's growing as fast as it was before the pandemic. So that growth has really very much normalized now. And in the current environment we're in today, where travel demand is normalizing, inflation is cooling down, the big question in the industry is whether prices can continue rising into 2024. And we certainly think so. And we really think that for three key reasons, as shown on the next slide. Yep. So we can see that firstly, if you actually include the impact of inflation, and don't forget, inflation has also risen quite a fair bit over the last few years. If you include that impact, hotel prices aren't actually higher than 2019 levels on a real basis. And then secondly, there is still demand recovery, i.e. there's still occupancy recovery to go in most markets around the world, and that should see prices rise in line with demand. And then thirdly, you know, we're still very much in an environment where there is high compression, and that means that demand growth is still significantly outpacing supply growth, and that is allowing hotels to have pricing power. So if you look at some of the inflation data on the next slide, yeah, we can see that, you know, hotel rates once adjusted for inflation aren't actually above 2019 levels at all on a real basis. So they haven't shown any real pricing strength yet. And so we can expect that to kind of improve in 2024. And if you go into the next slide, I think this chart is very interesting. If you kind of break down the data by chain scale, you can see that only luxury hotels have seen their prices rise above inflation, whilst all the other chain scales are still tracking below. And I think that means that they could still afford to raise their prices to be more in line with inflation rates. So there's still scope for further growth for those other chain scales, ex luxury. And if you go on to the next slide, yeah, I think this is an interesting chart also. And I think it shows that as we enter into a more normalized period, we can see from history that hotel pricing growth does tend to outpace inflation outside times of peak recessions. So it gives us further optimism that hotel prices will continue to rise in a more normalized period, and really shows some strength above inflation in 2024. So the next part of our thesis on hotel pricing is around demand recovery. And if you go on to the next slide, I think we can see here on the chart on the left that the recovery through the pandemic was really led by pricing growth. But we can see on the right-hand chart that in nearly every region, occupancy levels are yet to recover to 2019 levels. And on the next chart, we can see that this recovery post-COVID has really not been a normal case. It's very much been an exception to the rule. And the rule is usually that after periods of crisis, such as after 9/11 or after the 2008 GFC, we usually see that occupancies and prices recover in line with each other. But COVID has not followed that. We've seen that prices have led occupancy. But as you can see on this chart, as we enter into a more normalized period, we should see that as occupancy levels finally recover, pricing growth should also rise in line with that. So we can still see, and we still expect further pricing growth in 2024 due to that demand recovery still to go. So the final cornerstone of our thesis is on supply. And I mean, I think understanding pricing movements ultimately does come down to understanding supply-demand dynamics, and the hotel industry is beholden to those laws of economics. And I think this chart really shows that in periods of low supply and high demand, prices tend to grow. And that's pretty simple economics, and the hotel industry does follow those laws of economics. If you go on to the next slide, we can see that today there still continues to be low supply growth and high demand, or demand growth outpacing supply growth. And supply growth is still constrained due to high interest rates affecting the financing of projects and high construction costs affecting the building of new hotels. So we continue to see that excess demand and low supply, and that manifesting itself as pricing power. So our views really come down to the fact that we don't think that prices will show double-digit growth that was seen through the pandemic, and Seth and Sonia have touched upon this already. But on an absolute dollar level, we do expect that prices will continue to rise through 2024. So I'll pass it back to Seth now to round us off.
Yeah. Hey everyone. So I'm back for the conclusion, and thank you for all of that. So I want to end with some thoughts on travel's long-term outlook. Right? We've talked about this short-term outlook, and you heard me say we think this is a period of normalizing growth. We think there's still economic support for growth, both in North America and Europe, especially out of Asia. You heard Sonia talk about that orange is the new black. Asia is the new Europe, as well as supported by large mass events and Swifties and Olympians and all that stuff. And then you heard Pranavi. Again, it was sector specific about hotels, but I think it has broad applications to online travel, and frankly, even to other sectors like cruise and airline. We still remain in a supply constrained market. We still see demand, and a lot of the pricing power has not been real pricing power. It's been driven by inflation, and there's room to grow above inflation. So we remain, optimistic for 2024. There's obviously always risks to an outlook. This is our base case. But regardless of the exact puts and takes of 2024, I do think it's also always important to end with a long-term view of what's happening kind of on a secular, multi-year, multi-decade trend. And that's that travel is a growing industry. Preference for travel is a global phenomenon. This is a Millennial and Gen Z report we did earlier. 5 different countries across all the many major regions, not all the major regions, but many major regions for travel. Everyone says it basically across the world, across generations. They'd rather spend money on travel than on things, especially from these rising generations. And I've shown this chart before. If you've seen me speak before, you might have seen this chart before. I really like it for a reason, though, right? Each of these bubbles is a country, and the horizontal x-axis, that's GDP per capita. So how wealthy is that country? And the vertical y-axis is travel expenditure per capita. So how much do people in those countries spend on travel? And what we're looking for is that grouping of dots in that nice line. There's a strong relationship. As countries get wealthier, they spend more on travel. It's true across languages, regions, histories, religions, you name it, demographics across the world. When people are wealthier, they travel more. And so if you believe that the world is getting wealthier, which we believe it will get wealthier in 2024, we believe it will be wealthier 10 years from now than it was today, then you also have to believe that the travel industry will grow. And there's another secular tailwind here, which is that international travel has become easier. We've seen an almost unprecedented rise in freedom of movement. This is a visa-free score for the median country, how many other countries are you able to visit without needing a visa. And you can see since 2006, it's nearly doubled to the average country can now visit almost 90 other countries without needing a visa. So you've got these long-term secular shifts, generational shifts in people preferring travel experiences, generational shifts in wealth creation driving the travel industry, and generational shifts in freedom of mobility, all of which set up our industry for growth, not just into 2024, but beyond. So there's a lot more detail in our Outlook. Again, it's available 25% off with this QR code. We're going to stick around for the next 15, 20 minutes and take some questions from the audience. If you have any, we're happy to take them. So that's our canned presentation, so to speak, as we had prepared. But we're going to stick around with the rest of the team and take some questions. All right, let's go to the chat, shall we? Well, maybe I'll throw this to you a little bit, Pranavi. I see one from a LinkedIn user, Seth, Sonia. Thanks for hosting this today. Question for the Q&A. Curious, what trends are you predicting for online travel in 2024? So, Sonia, Pranavi, you did our sector-specific stuff. You do a lot of work on online travel as well. If you have any online travel experts, Pranavi is a true expert on this. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, online, it's super interesting because we're coming into this kind of normalized time post-COVID, and I think 2024 is very different to 2019 in terms of the online space. And I think what COVID really allowed during the pandemic was this refragmentation of the distribution landscape. It allowed new entrants to come in, such as Hopper, and we wrote a comprehensive deep dive on Hopper on Skift Research, so check that out if you're interested in companies like Hopper. But it also allowed smaller entrants to come in, local OTAs, and Google, of course. Google made some significant changes to its Google Hotels tool, allowing organic results to show up for free, and that really facilitated this new competition coming in. And I think all this new competition is allowing it. What it means is that Booking and Expedia, which saw a decade of enormous growth, between the great financial crash and up to pre-COVID levels, I think those kind of salad days of Booking and Expedia have really come to an end. And because the environment has gotten more competitive, I think we're seeing that Booking and Expedia are now launching new initiatives, new tools to kind of really show that they're still innovating, and they're still still maintaining that market share that they had. We're seeing that Booking is expanding into the US, it's expanding into flights. Expedia is really going into B2B. Hopper as well is really expanding its B2B area. And I think B2B is a very interesting part of the online travel space we're going to see in 2024. So yeah, very interesting to see how these new ventures kind of play out in this post-pandemic environment.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. The dynamics seem more competitive than they've been in a very long time, and online travel is always a competitive space. So it's really exciting. I think it's gonna be a great year for online travel in 2024. And they benefit from a lot of the other stuff you talked about too. Like, if OTAs mostly sell hotels and hotel pricing power can continue, that has direct feed through to gross bookings for online travel. So we've got a question from Dan. How would an actual recession or stagnating inflation affect your outlook? You mentioned it's mainly a vibe issue for now, but how likely is that some of the widespread economic uncertainty or political uncertainty impacts travel? And so this is, I think, a question about risks. And I do want to be clear that this is our base case and of optimism, but there are always risks to an economic outlook like this, or to a travel outlook like this. And we can always be wrong about specific assumptions. And one of our assumptions is about economic growth and modest inflation. I think a recession would be bad. I mean, that's the simple answer is recessions are not good. But the real more complex answer is that what would cause a recession, and what in particular would cause a recession to be truly global in nature. I think a lot of us are still kind of traumatized by COVID, which was a truly global pandemic. I mean, it's in the word pandemic. And also, to an extent, by the global financial crisis. The key is in the name global. But a localized recession in one country or another doesn't necessarily have the same global impact that those two huge crises had. And so if you saw an economic slowdown in one or two European countries, or in one or two Asian countries, I don't think it necessarily derails the forecast, but it does drive that sort of decoupling that we were talking about. I think there's another question from Nicole here about what risks do you see for travel in 2024, and those are similar. I might go around the horn on this one and ask some people, but certainly one of my risks I'm worried about is China. We think that this is their year. We think we are really seeing those green shoots, and maybe Sonia can talk more about that. But certainly there's a risk that if the economic conditions in China don't go as well as hoped, or if inflation in Europe is higher than expected, you could see a partial slowdown. But what I don't see is a systemic risk that would apply to all regions across the world at the same time. I think that's a key differentiator. I'm going to throw this to you, Sonia. What risks are keeping you up for our outlook?
I think, like you mentioned, Seth, China, now we're expecting China to, I mean, even in 2023, the moment China reopened, there was this expectation that there would be this crazy boom. But the travel volumes did not come back as was expected. And we did see that a lot of countries like Thailand, dependent on Chinese travel, have suffered. So the change in consumer preferences, where now maybe they want to travel more domestic and not as much international, is certainly a risk. But like you said, maybe not as many globally, destabilizing consequences like we saw after COVID. But of course, the what's happening in Ukraine and the conflict in Israel is affecting tourism numbers. So if any escalation of conflict in those regions might also have consequences on travel. Of course, and 2024 is also the year of elections. So any sort of conflict that comes out of that will also pose a risk to travel.
Yeah, elections in India as well, right? Not just US, not just in Europe. What do you think, Pranavi? What risks?
Yeah, I think I kind of touched on this a little bit in my section, but I think supply growth is a real risk that still continues on into 2024. Costs have gone up, interest rates are still high, the financing of new projects is still tough, is still in this very constrained supply environment. And though that might manifest itself as pricing power, and we see that pricing strength will continue, growth is a supply growth is a part of overall revenue growth, the demand growth. So if supply growth is constrained for a longer period of time, that will affect overall revenue growth on the top line for a few years. So that's a big risk that I'm still concerned about into 2024.
Yeah, I think we gave a very optimistic outlook and we remain optimistic, but I think this discussion about risks is important, right? It's important for us all to keep in mind that this is a base case and there's always risks, and it's important to acknowledge them and plan for them and see, be monitoring them. I want to take a couple of other, maybe some quick hit questions. I saw some fun ones in here. I saw someone ask about travel to Africa, which I think is a fun one. We have a little bit of data in our full outlook on Middle East and Africa kind of brought together. I think that Africa remains a smaller market for the time being. There's huge demographic potential. Yeah, there was two of those. There's huge demographic potential in terms of domestic and outbound travel from Africa. And there's also potential for inbound in terms of luxury safaris. I think one of the interesting things is, if I can kind of loop it into this area, is that Middle East, North Africa broader group, and a lot of excitement in the Middle East. I know I'm kind of shifting the African answer to the Middle East, but it is commonly viewed as Middle East, North Africa as a common category as well. And people from the Middle East traveling to Africa and also inbound travel to the Middle East, that is a really interesting sector. More to come.
Yeah, there. I think maybe I'll just add a quick thing. I think one thing we saw, not just in Africa, but globally, is that people discovered domestic travel in a way that they hadn't before. And Africa, of course, is huge, but I think Africans living in one African country are now traveling more to other African countries for travel, and domestic travel has really boomed. And I feel like in Africa, it's opened up. It's not just safari, right? I think the world has realized that there's a lot more in in Africa, besides just safari, there's a lot of culture and places to see in its own regard. And I think that domestic part of it's very interesting, and we should see domestic travel really be a big part of 2024 as well.
Yeah, demographics is destiny, and the demographics in Middle East and Africa are really strong. And I can talk about this more, but we sometimes talk about how the center of gravity in travel is moving eastward and southward, moving away from. And still, obviously, Europe is still incredibly important. North America is still incredibly important, but Asia, Africa, Middle East are pulling the center of gravity in the travel industry from west to east and a little bit from north to south. Let's get some other questions here. I like this one. Post-COVID, how has business travel recovered? And I think that there was another, I think there might have been another business travel question. I might throw this one to you, Sonia. I mean, or am I putting you on the spot here? Would you have any thoughts on business travel? I know we talked about it a little bit, but I mean, what do you think?
Sure. So maybe, business travel in the traditional sense where, you're picking your bag, going and meeting people might not entirely recover. But I mean, business travel for roles where it's a logistical necessity does might be making a comeback, like, consultants, sales reps who it's a necessity. Also, a large part of this is because companies have tightened their budgets. So, any kind of business travel will undergo careful evaluation, and it will be more outcome driven. But
Yeah.
having said that, we're seeing. Sorry, were you saying something, Seth?
No, I was going to finish it off.
So, having said that, we're seeing a lot. We're seeing conferences, events, exhibitions really come back. And while companies might send, smaller delegations, that kind of travel where you meet people at events is back. And of course, I mean, with remote work, Zoom meetings, the most important thing that's still popular is blended travel, or pleasure, like we call it, which is combining work and vacations. And a large part of this is because of the change in demographics, where now it's more popular with the younger workforce, and this is also looked upon by companies as a way to facilitate a work-life balance for employees. So that is still popular.
Yeah, I like the way Alan asked the question here. Companies have gotten more used to remote work and meetings, and what does that mean? And I think this plays into that blended travel theme. Certainly, there's more conversation about return to office. I think we had a great stat. I think it was in our travel tracker. During the in 2021, people were working remotely on average 4 days a week. Now they're working remotely on average, at least in the U.S., 2 or 3 days a week, 2 days a week, let's call it. So that's depending on one way of looking at it, that's a 50% decline. The other way of looking at it is that the average was 0 days remote in 2019. And so we are definitely in a world of more permanent, blended remote work. Now, full-time remote work is maybe under threat a little bit, although not at Skift. If you want to work for a company that is fully remote, talk to Skift. But I think the consensus is that like business travel is maybe like 80% recovered. It's working its way towards full recovery, but there's also new types of business travel. Some types of business travel spend get cut. There are new forms coming from blended travel, coming from other forms of retreats, things like that, that are taking its place and helping drive business travel growth. What else do we have? We have one. We kind of have two here, actually, on airlines. We have one on strong airline growth estimate, and we have another one on the measuring the evolution of airline transportation. So let's start with this one. We're calling for like about 12% growth in airlines. Asia. The answer here is Asia. There's a lot of pricing wars in the United States. Spirit and Frontier, or maybe let's just say flights to Florida can be relatively cheap these days, and those can be very profitable. What's so interesting about the airline industry is that it can be very regional specific, and that we talked about supply constraints and how supply constraints can be a risk, how they can drive pricing power, and how they apply to everything. The thing with the airline industry is that supply can be very mobile, unlike the hotel industry. And so when there's a lot of demand on one route, you can shift capacity and kind of swap that route with capacity. The key, though, is the reopening of China, reopening of Asia, the rebuilding of capacity, Trans-Pacific, Europe to Pacific, and regional within Asia. And that's what's driving the core of our estimates. And then there was another question from Axel. Any trends regarding the evolution of airline transportation or new hubs? Not in our outlook, but we have a new report coming on some of these low-cost carriers that can run more long-haul routes. And I think that will be an interesting thing in terms of new hubs, certainly a pivot back towards Asia, as well as new long-distance narrow-body aircraft over the next couple of years could also potentially really kind of redraw some network maps. But we're not putting anything specific in our outlook at this time. Do we have any more questions? Let's see some fun ones. All right, what about this one? How does anything else we want? How does AI play into the travel sector in 2024? Pranavi, I mean, I'm going to put you on the spot. Do you have any thoughts on this? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a big one, a big question. I feel like AI has a lot of potential in the travel industry, and a main one that I see is that AI will allow companies to understand their consumers on a much deeper level and allow for that hyper segmentation, and will allow for increased personalization of their offerings. So instead of just segmenting a consumer into business or leisure, I think what AI can allow companies is that they can now see, okay, you're not just a leisure consumer, you're traveling with your family, or you're a scuba diver, and really understand what that consumer wants from their trip, and then being able to offer a very personalized experience. And that's really, I think, the holy grail of what AI can offer for the travel industry. Seth, do you want to add on that, perhaps?
I mean, I think it's all about personalization and get into a stage of hyper personalization. That requires a lot of work, though, right? I think what we're quickly learning is it's not going to be a magic bullet. It's going to require a lot of work internally and externally. You need to have your own data in place. You need to have your internal, in order to, the goal is to hyper personalize your product, understand your consumer, how they're traveling, what they want, how to give it to them. In order to do that, you need to have your products on the back end tagged. You need to have your consumer data well collated, understood, and that's going to require a lot of work for some companies that aren't really ready for that yet. But I think it's a long-term trend that's going to have a huge impact. And I mean, there's implications down the line too, in terms of like, we're already seeing, I mean, I don't know if they're good trips, but people are already planning trips with generative AI and asking ChatGPT for itineraries, and it's going to change a lot of stuff, eventually. So it's coming. I think, well, I wanted to ask one question. I'm gonna get to this question last. I see there's overwhelming demand for questions. I see there's a lot of people asking about educational travel. I think Lorraine and a couple of others are asking about educational travel. We don't have a ton of data on educational travel, right? This is a smaller segment, but it's important and it's growing. I think this really, I was going to tie into that final answer. We don't have a specific view on educational travel, but it is part of a broader shift towards experiences, towards young people wanting to travel more, and towards experiential spending and experiential learning at all stages of life, not just young students, but also older adults. And so I just wanted to address that because I saw there were a couple of questions on it. And then this final question, I think this will be our final question for this session, but how are travelers' preferences shifting towards experiential spending in the travel industry? I mean, I think they're very much shifting. I know, Sonia, do you have any? I mean, I might be putting you on the spot again, Sonia. Do you have any thoughts on this? And I might, you too as well, Pranav. If you have any thoughts, jump in here.
Yeah, I think like we discussed, it certainly is even a part of our consumer trend, right? That that is one of even when there are economic worries and you read a lot of stuff about how people are reducing spending, like you discuss the different trends and experiences is something people do not want to compromise on. It's still a lot of our surveys actually discuss this, where experiences, some of the experiences or immersing into culture in different locations is something, and of course global the mass tourism events like the Taylor Swift Eras tour that we talked about in the report is a part of the experiential
Yeah.
spending as well.
The Taylor Swift thing is a great example, right? And also you used about the Cricket World Cup. I think, probably, weren't we just talking about some Taylor Swift numbers? Do we had like an over?
Yeah. So I was yesterday. We were doing some analysis on trying to gauge what's the impact of Taylor Swift's Eras tour on the travel industry, and we came to something over $1 billion additional spending across all the travel verticals: flights, hotels, F&B, short-term rentals, which is a huge number. And I think just to kind of add on what Sonia said, I think what we're seeing is that experiences is really moving up the booking funnel. So whilst before you might have picked a destination based on the destination, you are now picking a destination based on what you want to do, such as attend Taylor Swift's concert. And I would just say, if you want some data on this, we have published a report on the tours and experiences sector, highlighting kind of a time series of spending increasing over the last 10 years and our estimates further beyond. So do check that out as well.
Yeah, I think that final point about experiences moving up the decision-making funnel is the key part of what's happening with experiential. People interested in active travel, in food travel, in big events and connections, in blended travel, and especially amongst and even educational travel, right? Amongst younger generations, it's absolutely happening. It's happening in self-guided trips, in multi-day trips, in day tours and experiences. And yeah, you wrote an excellent report on that, which people can check out if they're interested in more. So I think that's going to be it for our Q&A, and we're gonna wrap up that session. I don't know if we can bring that QR code back up, but I really hope you've enjoyed the session. You found this intriguing. If you want more details, more numbers, more sector-specific stuff, you can go ahead and grab that by looking at our Global Travel Outlook. Sonia and Pranavi are both going to have mini reports available online for free on our website that both discuss some of their sections in particular. And look, if you're interested in any of the things we discussed, we can always go deeper on all these topics. Please reach out to Skift Research. We're research@skift.com. That'll get you to our inbox, or you can reach out to Farhim Aziz at skift.com, fa@skift.com. And we're always happy to talk about this stuff. And just thank you so much for joining us. And I hope you learned something and found it useful, and looking forward to a great 2024. And thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Pranavi. This was excellent. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.